You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where I, Raina Wilson, your host, will bring together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and insight. So many times life becomes messy and overwhelming to sift through all the data, research, and influencer must-haves in order to really be the healthiest version of you. If you're looking to learn, grow, and listen to other people's stories in their own wellness journey, then keep listening, because there might just be some wisdom for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have writer and founder of the Crappy Christian Company, Blake Guichet. Blake is the host of a popular podcast called Confessions of a Crappy Christian, a weekly show that specializes in conversations with guests about their passions, struggles, and all the things that they aren't sure that they can talk about. In today's episode, Blake shares some hot takes about stepping away from crunchy culture and mom boss culture to really find freedom and what that looks like and what the world defines as success. You won't want to miss today's girl chat as well as Harry Potter fandom, so let's go ahead and dive in. Hello, Blake. Welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. Man, like I said, I'm fangirling a little bit, but it's fine. We're fine.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I would love to start off by just hearing about what is like a day in the life of Blake. Like, what does regular life look like?
Yeah, it's so funny that you asked that because I was just thinking I'm finally kind of hitting a rhythm. I was like, I should do like a day in the life on Instagram, but I'm notoriously terrible at those because I lose interest like halfway through the day. And I'm like, oh, wait, I forgot I was doing that. But I tell people I'm a full-time content creator and homemaker. And those two jobs are like my two full-time jobs. So wake up in the morning, get the girl, like, I don't even open my phone. The girls are my priority, get them ready for school, like get them out the door, go to the gym, get home, like pick up around the house, make bed, like very so normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 9 o'clock, I'm like, all right, it's time to log in. and I spend my day getting to do this with people, have really incredible conversations on podcasts, either on theirs or on mine, or creating content for Instagram. I'm literally working on covering the Tennessee drag bill right now because people are losing their minds about it. And I'm like, well, did you read the bill? Because it's only a page and a half long. Um, so just get to do stuff like that and then kind of turn it off again in the afternoon and shift back into mom mode and run kids to gymnastics and art class and make dinner. And so it's definitely this like I've had this very clear delineation in my life of like
Mm-hmm.
work and life, but I love it.
Yeah, I mean, those are clear and healthy boundaries, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did not have those for a long time, which I think is why I'm so, like, thankful for them now.
Well, before we get started, I'd just love to know, like, what is your favorite aspect of motherhood right now? And then what is your favorite aspect of content creation?
Yeah. Okay. So my girls are 5 and 8, and so we're coming into the, like, they can wipe their own butts, get their own snacks, get their own drinks
Love
era,
that.
and I feel like it's freeing up brain space for me to be the mom I want to be. Like, when you're drowning in
Mm-hmm.
sippy cups and diapers and scheduling nap times and like just it's hard and it's a different kind of hard now, right? They're asking questions and I'm like, wait, is this too soon? Yeah, like I'm not ready to, like my friend always said, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, right? But I'm loving having the brain space to, and just that they're like cognizant enough to have conversations and ask questions. And I'm just not great at the baby stuff. I want to be like a nesting like newborn mom, but I'm just not. I'm just like, can you just tell me what you want, because I'll get it for you. I just don't,
Yep.
why are you yelling at me? So I think that shift and transition that we've been seeing in our family has been really life-giving, and I love that. Content creation. I mean, my favorite part of it is podcasting, bar none. Like it's no competition. I would spend my whole day being interviewed and interviewing if
Really?
that was all. Oh, 100%. Like Instagram is a necessary evil for
Okay.
me at this point, where it is a platform and God has blessed me with this incredible platform. I'm not going to waste it. I don't want to store it well, but also I prefer this. I prefer like talking about stuff that matters. And I do that on Instagram, but I love podcasting. When people ask me what I do, I'm like, I'm a podcaster
I've never
first.
resonated with anything more
Yeah.
because I definitely have felt this pull towards
Yeah.
when I first launched this podcast because we're fresh. And I was like, but I feel like I should be doing, I felt all the weight of the shoulds
Mm,
on Instagram. And again, I love Instagram. I love connecting. I love like the platform it is for research now. Love that in the wellness space,
yeah.
but it can get super overwhelming. And like you said, I love
Yeah.
the real conversations with real people because even that can get lost in the Instagram world.
Well, and it does, especially as your platform grows. Like I've had to loosen my grip on wanting to answer all of my DMs. It's physically impossible and I will make myself crazy. And so as you grow, you start to kind of lose a little bit of that more personal element. I think it's still there, but I think that's part of why I've shifted into really loving this is because I can't live in my DMs. First of all, people will say the most insane off the wall things, and sometimes I just have to protect my energy. But
Hmm.
also, I can't keep up. And so I want to have conversations.
Oh, for sure. I think a friend of mine recently, I was like coming to her with like my imposter syndrome. And in her wisdom, she was like, Raina, what if you haven't quote unquote blown up yet? Because it's an aspect of the Lord's protection
Amen.
of your life. And I was like, okay, thanks. I
Yes.
needed that.
And like blowing up is overrated, honestly. Like you can reach so many people. Think about it. If you have 1,000 followers on Instagram, that's 1,000 people. That is 1,000 people. That's so many people. That's bigger than a lot of churches that you get to lead and steward and love and shepherd.
Mm.
That's amazing. Like I hate that we've made it like a thing, because there's pros and cons.
Like it's a commodity to identity. Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I would love to dive into Confessions of a Crappy Christian, like your book, your podcast.
Yeah.
Like, what was the heart and essence, I think, that kind of pushed you to publish?
Yeah. So Confessions of a Crappy Christian started as the podcast. That was the original. I had a book, um, like proposal outline,
Hmm.
but it was dusty. It was like sitting on a shelf. I'd had it for a couple of years. I wanted to write a book since I was 12. And
Hmm.
so I'd been kind of working on it in between having babies and breastfeeding babies and all of that kind of stuff. And so Confessions of a Crappy Christian was my 30th birthday present to myself.
Wow.
And I was deeply in the trenches of postpartum anxiety and depression and was desperately looking for more, I don't know, just real conversation, not authentically curated. Motherhood is hard. No, I want to talk about, I don't know if I can do this, or
Hmm.
my brain feels like it's breaking. And then that makes me feel like maybe I don't have the Holy Spirit and maybe God doesn't love me as much. I wanted to have those conversations. And the landscape of podcasting has changed a lot in the last 4.5 years. And you're seeing
Hmm.
those conversations so much more. And I'm so thankful for that. But at the time, there really wasn't a lot of that. It was very Bible study, let's
Right.
talk about Proverbs 31 woman kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And so launched it out into the world on my birthday. And by like the 1 year anniversary, it had charted at number 4. So it I don't want to pretend like it didn't blow up pretty quickly, but I think it was just people were just as desperate and looking for the same conversations. And the title is witty and it draws people in, and
Yeah.
that's, I think that really helped a lot. And so that was 2019. So that was my first year. No, my first year of podcasting was 2019. My second year of podcasting is 2020, which is just like
Oof.
nuts. And by end of 2020, I signed a book deal with a Christian publishing house and kind of just pulled that outline out and then threw it away and completely started over. And
Wow.
the book is really an extension of the podcast. I feel like it's something hard that I can hand somebody that just
Hmm.
tackles, again, the same thing, like the hard questions, the things that religion tends to not know what to do with, and that just has really resonated with people. I think I I think of myself as this like anti-deconstructionist where I believe in deconstructing what you believe if you intend to rebuild it on a stronger foundation. And that's kind of what I feel like I get to help people do.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important. Like that was the heart behind this podcast was if I could speak to Raina as a baby and Raina freshly pregnant and Raina postpartum and now with my mass chaos toddler,
Yeah.
like if only I were wiser about all of the things wellness because wellness isn't just about your nutrition. Like
Mhm.
I'm certified in those things, but like your wellness is the fact that sometimes I need to look at my best friend or my community group and be like, I don't really want to be a mom this week. That's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wellness is so much bigger than supplements and food. I mean, the amount of time that I've had to spend trying to lower my stress levels just because I'm naturally a real stressy person
Hmm.
but that's radically changed my health. Just calming the heck down.
Yeah.
Like the things like that that I think get not left out, but not prioritized in that conversation as much as it should.
Hmm. And I think I see it more in like the crunchy culture because like I lean towards like the non-toxic just a vibe in general.
Yeah.
But I was talking to somebody the other day. It was like it doesn't matter all of the like supplements and stuff and what products you use in your home if you're like stressed the F out and you can't
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
co-regulate with your kids or you feel like you're going to have a panic attack when you get out of bed or you went to Starbucks and you're freaking out about the fact that like they don't have all the milk that you want.
Right. Yeah, that's it's funny because I guess it was sometime last year. It was like right after summer. I like broke up with the crunchy community
Mm.
because I was so exhausted and the bar never stopped moving. And it was always something I was doing wrong when I knew I was doing my best. And so it wasn't that I walked away from non toxic living or I didn't go start just eating McDonald's every day. But I was just like, I gotta, like, I muted some people on Instagram, I unfollowed some people on Instagram. I just needed to give myself a break from, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, like, okay, I've gotten this figured out. What's next? What do I have to tackle now? And just that's just as toxic, that level of stress, as the things that I think a lot of that community are warning us about. I'm like, can we come back to the middle just a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there has been a little bit of a transition to kind of at least there are a handful of content creators that I follow that are like, "Hey, like yes, I speak about this this and this in my home, but we also ordered Domino's this week because I wasn't about to cook dinner." And I was like,
Right.
"Thank you, but
Thank
like we should
you.
talk about that a little bit more often
Yes.
because like you said earlier, like social media can be such a like curatedly authentic feed, which
Yes.
just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Ugh. So, how would you encourage women to, I think, just be bold in
Mm.
comparison or like starting to wrestle with some of these like really ugly feelings that may come up?
Like, when they're getting started, like, trying to do something like this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I could go back to 2018 me, because I actually prayed about starting the podcast for almost a year before I actually did it, because it was, I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody and their mom had a podcast then, and it's even more so now. Everybody has a podcast. Everybody's doing it better than you.
Yeah.
There's nothing new you're bringing to the landscape. Do you really think you can handle this? I had all of those doubts and questions. And ultimately, I had to kind of shut up and just ask what God wanted me to do and get to a point where I was okay with however uncomfortable or crazy or out of pocket. My family has made some nuts decisions in the last 4.5 years. I mean, my husband left his full time corporate job to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
basically took a year off to live off of my income and our savings. And it was crazy, but we knew it was what God wanted us to do next. And when you have that confidence, when you've quieted yourself and asked God and listened, it's it can be pretty difficult to convince me otherwise if that's the confidence that I have, because your own confidence that you're kind of mustering up, that fake it till you make it, it's gonna crack. Like, that's not gonna carry you because it's dependent on flesh and blood and human emotions and feelings. Whereas if you have really, like, laid your life down at the foot of the cross, do I believe that God's gonna ask me to do things that are hard and difficult and that I don't wanna do? 100%. But I've have grown. I didn't always function this way, but I've grown to where now, on the other side of that, like, his plans are always way better than mine are. Mine, we crash and burn. We run into a wall. So boldness, and that is the
Mhm.
only I think it's the only real fighting chance that Christians have against imposter syndrome, is the assurance of, I'm taking the next right step in obedience. This is what I feel like God has next, what I feel like God has next for me. And I don't even need to know what the next steps are after that. I'm just going to keep stepping into that. Because then if you're doubting that, you have to come to terms with that you're doubting God, that you're not trusting God. Like, that's a difficult realization to come to.
Oof. Oof. Yeah. You definitely just said like my whole story this past year out loud. And
Yeah.
my husband and I, like, I think he had the analogy of I was really wrestling with launching the podcast. Like you said, it's something that I've prayed and dreamed and like really loved the vision behind it for years. And so once I finally felt like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to buy a mic off of Amazon and sit in my closet.
Yeah.
My husband described it as this analogy of, Raina, I think like the Lord has called you off of the highway. Like everybody is like driving past you. You're watching everybody go 100 miles an hour. You're seeing this person on Instagram creating courses. They're making this income, blah, 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 blah. And the Lord has called you to pull off the highway, quite literally smell the flowers and just enjoy it. And I remember having the conversation with him that I was like, that is so hard when I'm watching people succeed. You know, I know what their
Yeah.
sales are off of what they're creating on Instagram. Like I'm watching them fly by towards all the things that I think that I want. But then I felt this like I guess disturbance of my spirit because every time I like pictured myself in this analogy walking back to my car, I had no peace. Like every time I like made steps towards, well, maybe I can do what they're doing. Actually, I know I can do what they're doing. I could create these things. I could create this content. I could create this course. But every step I took towards getting back in my own car to try and get on the highway, like I physically felt sick in my stomach and I knew that's not where I was supposed to be. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a hard place to
Yeah.
wrestle knowing this is where the Lord has called me, but I also have to guard my heart from what I'm seeing other people doing.
And that doesn't even necessarily mean that you won't end up at the same place as them. You just may take the scenic route, which then you get to like learn all of these lessons before, I think about these people that we've seen have massive amounts of success and then completely crash and burn.
Yeah.
Almost all of them blew up in some form overnight. It was, they went viral, they had this massive, really fast rise to success, and then they didn't have the tools to
Mm.
handle it. Humans were not created to have as much input and output as we do.
Yep.
And so I think about those people and I'm really thankful that that has not been my experience, because there's absolutely more that I would like to be doing and things that I would like to achieve that I see other people doing. But I think I've had to learn that if I'm not there, it either means that's not for me or I'm not ready for it.
Ooh, yeah. And I think it goes back to the other day or a couple weeks ago, you posted the reel that went viral about the village.
Yeah.
And that's like just that reminder was like, I am constructing whatever image I'm supposed to believe that success and superiority looks like in motherhood, in like this online world of business now. Like, when in reality, the Lord's intention wasn't really social media. at least for like what we
Right.
use it for now in a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
Circling back to imposter syndrome, how do we guard our hearts in that, especially as believers?
I think there's some really tangible things of I mean, there are definitely people that I've had to step away from consuming a lot of their content because it triggers something in me, not because of them, not because of what they're doing, but because I look at their content and go, "I want that." And it uh it like festers into discontentment. And so and then that discontentment will turn into I'm never going to get there and what am I even doing? Why am I even showing up? And it's just like how do we get here? How did I end up here? But I also think going back to
Mm-hmm.
what I was saying earlier of are you measuring your steps by like God and God's timeline and his will for your life or by the world's or someone else's or one that you created? Because you can't be an imposter in God's plan. Like you're there on purpose. He created you the way that he did. He thinks you're great. He likes you. He loves you. He thinks he did a good job making you. You you can't be an imposter. It's physically impossible. I think well, but I also think that there are times that people legitimately struggle with imposter syndrome because they are fighting and scrapping and clawing their way into what they want, completely leaving behind like the still small voice that's telling them, "Hey, what about this?
Mm,
What about this gift that you have? Let's go this way." So I think sometimes imposter syndrome can be a good thing when it's not really imposter syndrome,
mm-hmm.
it's conviction, right? It's we've gotten a little
Right.
off track. Let's pull things back a little bit. But then I also think on the other side, true imposter syndrome is just like a tool of the enemy to make people sit down and not use their gifts and not show up for the kingdom. And he loves that.
Oh, yeah. And I think I shared this on a separate episode, but multiple conversations with friends was when I was bringing that to the Lord, like you said, that start of imposter syndrome, or rather conviction. For the first time in like months, I heard the Lord respond, "What are you chasing?"
Mm,
And I was just like, that desire to be seen, valued, known,
yeah.
famous, whatever titles I wanted to put on it, the Lord gently reoriented me back to, but Raina, you have all of those aspects of your identity in me. So, like, looking to seek this in so many other places that
Right. Exactly.
will not bring you life.
I my question was who's getting the glory? Whose glory are you working for? And I was like, who? Mine, sorry.
Let me just take that knife out of my chest. Thank you,
Yeah.
Lord.
Exactly.
I think, at least recently, I've always heard, comparison is a thief of all joy. But the more that I have like really wrestled with this recently, I think it's more like a poison because it isn't like this initial like just vacuum suck of joy in my life. I think it's this slow, gradual, it seeps into all of these other thought patterns. It seeps into all of these other behaviors. And then it's like, well, why am I snapping at my son or my husband this week? Oh, probably because one, I'm not in the word and renewing my mind and spirit. But also, I've been on Instagram way more today or listening to these people, and the narrative in the back of my mind is like, you are less than, look at how
Right.
much better that they're doing than you, and see everything that you are doing isn't enough.
That's such a great analogy of that it's really more of a poison because the joy is still there. Joy is a person and it's the person of Christ and that doesn't leave us, but it can get deprioritized. We can move it down the chain of importance and in its place put the things that you were saying, success, fame, recognition, and then like you said, you're snapping at your family and they're like, "What's wrong with me?" "Oh, I just spent the last
Hmm.
hour comparing myself to a bunch of people that I don't know. I don't know what their behind the scenes look like. Yeah, they have a ton of downloads, but they may hate their life." And comparing their this snapshot to my whole life, yeah, you're discontent. Like, yeah, you feel like an
Right.
imposter and like you'll never amount to anything. because it's not the whole picture. Even people who are showing up on social media actually authentically, you still are only seeing what they want you to see.
How would you encourage women, or rather, like in those own moments for yourself, how do you take steps towards reorienting your heart?
It's kind of cheesy, but I had to commit to memory versus like taking your thoughts captive and whatever is true and whatever is pure and whatever is good. Um because I mean, I definitely have this propensity to go down that rabbit hole and spiral, and next thing you
Mhm.
know, I just think I'm a total failure and everything I do is a failure and why am I even trying and I should just shut up and sit down. And the only person that can control that in any form is me. Like I'm the only that stuff is going to come into your
Mhm.
orbit. I think we can build this bubble and none of those thoughts ever come through, but that's just not the way real life is. And so I've never, like my whole life, grew up in church, grew up around Bible verses, would hear the whole taking your thoughts captive and, setting your mind on Christ and renewing your mind, and was like, that sounds really hard, and I don't think I can do it because my brain has a mind of its own. But in reality, like if scripture is true that we've been given everything we need for life and godliness, that means I already have the tools and the ability to like be in control of my thought life.
Mhm.
That's a game changer when you start prioritizing that. Because I kind of like what we were talking about with the crunchy community. We can get so caught up in the exterior and that we're doing all the right things and saying all the right things and showing up. But then inside, everything's just mush. And that will a lot of the time be exemplified in your actions and in the way you're interacting in your life. And it's so funny because I feel like that was a really big like deconstruction for me, was recognizing how behavior based the church is, and that changed hearts is where changed behavior comes from, and just kind of being like, okay, I'm going to stop being a psycho about everything that I do and like really focus on the word of God and what he teaches us, and got to kind of live out that changed. When your heart changes and your mind changes, then your actions change.
Mhm. And I think it starts by having these conversations. Like if I
100%.
didn't have a community where I was like, guys, I don't know if I can say this out loud, period. Like people should have this space to be like, hey, I might sound like a horrible mother right now, but I just like need to share this for my own mental
Yeah.
health.
Yeah.
And I think that's super stigmatized just in the church. And thankfully, like I have friends to process that with. And we've had like conversations on the podcast about like, there's a lot of growth in the church. I actually just finished Francis Chan's Letters to the Church. Oof, that's a whole something else. But
Yeah.
I think it starts with having these conversations, whether you're in a church or not. It's a heart change from being like vulnerable and authentic. And ultimately, that's the Holy Spirit doing its job in your own life. But maybe for unbelievers or people that are like not
Yes.
about the church right now, it starts with having people that you can be real with.
Yeah. 100%.
So you mentioned earlier like the intimidation, but also like the boldness of and fullness of walking into God's calling in your life. How would you speak to those women that are like, the Lord has called me to this thing, but right now I'm in the stage of like, no, thank you. Moses, like
Mhm.
a Moses moment of like,
Yeah.
please send somebody else, not me.
Yes. My the advice that I give everyone, from coaching clients to my children, it's the cheesiest, but it works. Is like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So God may be putting this really daunting thing in front of you. I'll use a personal example. I've been talking about this on my personal social media that I live in Southern Louisiana. I've never lived anywhere else. And for the last 18 months, I really thought God was going to let us move. I was so excited to get out of here. I was so excited. And then end of last year, God made it really clear. No, you're staying, you're putting down roots, you're investing. And I was not
Hmm.
happy about it at first. I had a pretty terrible attitude. I was like, okay, I'm going to be obedient, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And so then I felt like I was faced with this really huge task of not only staying, not only putting down roots, investing in my community, but having a joyful heart about it and enjoying it and it being content in God's plan for our life. And instead of, I think a lot of the time we think
Right.
we have to go from A to like Z, so we think we have to eat the whole elephant when God's not asking you to do that. Like with Moses, first, like Moses
Mhm.
went to Egypt, like he got there first. And that was probably the hardest step for him. And so I've gotten to a place where, and my husband, I've really roped him into this. So this term gets used a lot in our house, but it's just like, what's the next right step? Because the next right step doesn't necessarily have to be being crazy invested for me, like being crazy invested in my community and loving it. The next right step for me was I started like hanging things on the walls of my home because it was we're living here. We moved into a new house and
Mhm.
like 3 months later I was ready to leave. And so I didn't really decorate. And so it's been a matter of making our house a home and getting comfortable and also reaching out to people and inviting them over. It's like it didn't have to go from this hearing God's voice to fully doing the thing. And I think that that's really intimidating and it keeps people from getting started at all. Whereas,
Mhm.
like, I've just gotten so I'm just like, "Okay, what's the next right step?" And then you just have to listen and trust your heart because you have a new one that looks like Jesus and is filled with the Holy Spirit. And I've gotten so that I'll be like, "Okay, if this isn't the next right step, you better stop me because 'cause I'm going, like, let's go," and he will. He'll close doors and he'll open others, but
Mhm.
that would be my best advice would be
Yeah.
stop looking at the elephant and, like, what's the first bite? Is it like, if it's something like starting a podcast or stepping into the online space, maybe it's something like
Mhm.
buying a course that teaches you how to do it or starting to lay out some of the things that you wanna talk about and kind of getting a good foundational message going. Like, it doesn't have to go from, "God's asking me to do this," to, "I'm showing up on Instagram every day." Like, there's, like, steps in between, and if you skip those, you're gonna make it harder on yourself, honestly.
Right. And I think it's this level of we can still be upset with the Lord in the midst of obedience.
Amen.
Like it doesn't have to be, or rather, I have found more freedom by grumbling with the Lord to gratitude.
Yes.
It doesn't just go from obedience to gratitude because I'm a sinful person.
Right. Yeah. No, I just wrote a newsletter the other day about I remember the date, like, we know the date because we had this kind of crazy Jeremy and I were sitting across from each other, and we, like, heard God say, "Stay," and it was nuts, and it's, like, 2 or 3 times in my life that that's happened.
Wow.
But it was not an immediate, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what God's gonna do. This is gonna be so good." It was like, "Are you freaking kidding me? I'm so pissed. I don't wanna be here. I'd found where I wanted to move." Like, oh, and had, like, kind of loosened my grip on this place, and now God's asking me to pick it up again, and so it was like that was such a great lesson for me in grumbling with the Lord
Mm,
and wrestling with the Lord and being willing to come to him with my questions and my dissatisfaction and my disappointment and not be afraid. Not be like, "Oh, is he gonna like am I allowed to do this?" Like, he wants you to come no matter what it is.
yeah. Right. Right. And that's where the change and heart change happens because of him, not because of us.
Exactly.
So, where does freedom come into this conversation? Super big, broad topic, but what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom, I mean, freedom starts and ends with the cross, right? That Jesus did something we could have never done, that he didn't have to do, so that we could experience freedom that doesn't make sense, that surpasses all understanding, that is so much bigger than a religion or a denomination or a personal conviction. It is the freedom. Like, I love the catechism that's the main focus of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. that is freedom, that I always talk about, like, Jesus privilege,
Mm,
because I'll get on my Instagram and talk about some big cataclysmic event and almost always try to close it with, "The kingdom is not at risk. Jesus is still on the throne. This is happening and this is true." And inevitably, there'll be pushback
right.
of, "Oh, like, what a privilege to take." I'm like, "Yeah, it is a privilege to take. Freedom is a privilege. For the freedom in
It
Christ
is.
to
Yeah.
know that the world is falling apart and also know that the battle is won." Yes, 100%. That is a privilege that is afforded to everybody.
Right. A free
People
gift.
choose not to, right, like, people choose not to take it, but it's there and it's available. And so, like, freedom is, like, it's everything. It is grace and it is peace and it is joy because, like, Jesus did something we never could and quite literally set us free.
Mhm. How do we start by creating more space for freedom in our lives?
Okay, I think there's different answers for different kinds of people. It depends on what your upbringing was, because freedom looks a lot different for somebody that grew up in, like, a really religious
Mhm.
situation versus someone who grew up in a home where maybe you went to church on Easter and Christmas,
Sure.
if then. So for someone like me who grew up in the church, freedom looked like letting go of religion and letting go of behavior-based faith and behavior-based trust, and actually believing that I was free to do whatever I want. Hot take. Free to do whatever I want, s- in conjunction with knowing that what I want has changed.
Yes.
That what I have a new heart, my desires have changed. I don't want to sin. I don't want to do things that hurt others, that hurt myself, that hurt the heart of God. So I can do whatever I want because my wants have changed.
Mhm.
Kind of like same take, different for people who maybe had a more, like, they thought they were experiencing freedom. It can be really easy to think that actually doing whatever you want with no repercussions, even though there's natural consequences, is freedom. But
Mhm.
it's really not. That's just a different kind of bondage, because you're chasing filling something in yourself that you're never going to find. You're never going to arrive at satisfaction when you're finding it through whatever the world has to offer you. And so it's discovering that real freedom is the freedom to do whatever you want because what you want has changed, and what you
Mhm.
want is what, like, is God's best for you. And so I think it's like this pendulum, right? That people are just we have to swing to the middle and, like, meet in the middle. We have the same experience with Christ and with his freedom, but you're just coming from different places.
Oh, totally. Like my husband grew up in a very conservative home and we did not really grow up in a faith-based home. So
Right.
within our marriage, we've had to really fight for, you will bring different preferences for the way that you worship and I will bring different preferences in the way that I found God later in life. So I love the way that I worshiped in the way that I first experienced the Lord.
Right.
But like you said, like freedom comes from the cross, not anything else that we could have done. And I totally agree. Like we have the freedom to do whatever we want. But ultimately, when you become a believer, your heart is changed in the sanctification process to look more like Jesus. Like I will not sin in the same ways that I did
Mhm.
when I was a baby believer. Now, doesn't mean that it doesn't suck sometimes, and it's not hard
Right.
to try to battle those flesh patterns.
Yes.
But like I love the Jesus privilege. Like, yes, it is fully a privilege, fully and freely offered to everybody,
Fully.
but it doesn't make the wrestling any less hard sometimes.
Absolutely.
Like we don't have to be content in the wrestle. And I think that's also a hot take.
Yeah. It doesn't have to all be like, it's not going to all be butterflies and rainbows. There are going to be times where God says things, does things, and you're like, "What the frick is happening?" And he can handle that. Like, he has really big
Yeah.
shoulders. He can handle it.
I would love to know how you think like the girl boss, mom boss kind of comes into this conversation, especially talking about freedom.
Yeah, so I hate that stuff. I hate, like, the term, like, girl boss, mom boss. First of all, I'm just a boss.
Yeah.
I am the boss. Like, I'm a boss. I'm somebody's boss. I don't need girl, I don't need mom, I don't need whatever in front of it. But also, I did the mom boss thing and I did the girl boss thing, and it sucks and it's so exhausting and it's life draining, and
Mm,
it is I have found it is virtually impossible to have those two words like live together and not become equal in importance in your life. And I tell people all the time, I will pick my children and my family over my work every day of the week
yeah.
as much as is afforded to me. I can't all like sometimes things happen, but if I'm given the choice, I'm going to choose my family. And when you're girl bossing, that boss part or your mom bossing, that boss part, there's a really high likelihood that it's going to become as important as the mom part
Mm,
is. I mean, that was my experience at least. And so also, I know this is a really like hippie take, but I'm like, why do we have to label everything?
true.
Like, can I just be a mother that is also really good at something else
Hmm.
and has built a business out of it? Can that like, do I have to
A whole
be
personality now.
right? Like, does it have to be a thing? This is just what I do, you know?
Yeah, I think it's been super interesting. My husband's in the army to see like what identity looks like when you wear it, like physically wear it.
Mm, mm,
For him to like show up to work or show up to like these new trainings he's been at with people he doesn't know and to like see somebody's rank and all of their qualifications and like who they are, successes, failures if you don't see certain patches on certain people, like that has been so I think humbling for me to watch from the outside of like yes, my husband shows up in uniform every day to work, but how many times do I do that as a mother?
mm.
On social media, to my son, to my friends, to my family. Like, how many times do I show up with whatever labels or identity I think is necessary that proves that, like, I'm worthy?
Yeah. It can be interesting in the identity conversation, right? Because all those things are good things.
Mhm.
Your husband serving his country, it's a good thing. Being a mother and being a podcaster to the glory of God are good things. Are they I used to a long time when I like was really talking about hustle culture and mom boss culture a lot, one of the things I would say is you're a one piece puzzle.
Mm,
Like people think that they all of these things that they do make up pieces of the puzzle of who they are. And like yeah, child of God is one of them and sanctified is one of them and but also daughter and mother and wife and podcaster and all this kind of stuff. No, like one piece puzzle, child of God.
right.
Everything else is extra. Everything else is an added bonus that isn't a part of my identity because that stuff is sand. Like, I'm not going to build the house of my identity on something that could change. What if I don't have a podcast in the
Mm,
future? And I've built my platform on being a podcaster, or I've built my life on being a podcaster.
yeah,
Like I want to build my identity on something that has never changed, is never going to change, so that when things inevitably get rocky, that doesn't get rocked.
yeah, definitely. I would love to just transition this conversation because I don't think we would be able to do this conversation justice if we didn't close without talking about this. I have to know. If you could have coffee with any of the Harry Potter characters, who would it be and why?
Oh, shoot. I really love book Jenny.
Okay.
Book Jenny and movie Jenny are not the same. I love book Jenny because she's so tenacious and sticks by Harry. It's just like
Mm,
such a great love story that got totally missed in the movie. Or Snape.
yeah.
Like, tell me about living a double life for most of your life and the sacrifices that you made and the things that you did and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I think that would be one of the two of those.
Oh, definitely. Totally agree. And all for the sake of love.
Wait, what would yours be?
Definitely Snape, but I
Yeah.
also really love Luna.
Yeah.
Like just to like sit with her and like get in her head and hear about like her family story
Yeah.
That's like super interesting to me. But I had to
Yeah.
ask because I'm a fellow
Yeah.
like Harry
That's a
Potter head.
great question. That's a great question.
And my husband and I were trying to plan a family trip to Disney because he is a Star Wars fan and I love him for
Mm.
that. But he's not a Harry Potter fan. So that's definitely a point of contention in our marriage.
Oof. I'm gonna pray for y'all.
Well, Blake, this has been such a fun conversation. I would love to share what what places our community can connect with you, services that you offer, where can we get plugged in?
Yeah, absolutely. The girlnamedblake.com is really a good hub for all of the things. You can find my podcast, you can find my book. I offer courses and coaching for creatives, for people who create content either for their small businesses or for their ministry platform, just kind of helping them grow it, but not like burn out and get into hustle culture in the meantime. And I do these like monthly master classes on different topics and write newsletters and just create all of the content. So the girl named Blake on Instagram and then the girlnamedblake.com, probably the best places to go.
Awesome. Perfect. I will link all of that. So, for our final question, it closes for all of our guests. So, if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
I mean, we kind of cover this in the episode, but I think if I could go back, I would try to teach myself to prioritize like rest and slowing down and not letting everything stress you out so much because it would just drastically improve my quality of life.
Yeah. Crazy what happens when you're not like consistently stressy and depressy because
Yes.
of non-necessary
Amen.
things. Well, Blake, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. This has been such a fun conversation just in general.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
I will link all of your stuff and we will catch you guys in the next episode. This episode of If Only I Were Wiser has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more episodes so you don't miss any encouragement. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to build our community and share more about topics that will be healing and helpful for you. See you in the next episode.